It's April 5th, 2021, and Mario Kart speedrunner Jenzua is time trialing Thwomp Ruins. He's trying to lower his time on the course, so he's attempting to learn a brand new strategy that involves performing a trick called Motion Glider right before the finish line. Motion Glider is one of the stranger aspects of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. When you use tilt controls, the game will still allow you to steer with the joystick in addition to physically moving the controller. But what happens when you try to turn with both of these methods at once? Usually, nothing out of the ordinary happens, but for some reason, if you're gliding and try this, the game doubles the inputs and lets you turn way sharper than what is normally possible and make it around corners faster. The reason that Motion Glider hadn't been utilized on Thwomp Ruins up until this point is fairly obvious. This isn't a corner, it's completely straight, so this glitch shouldn't be applicable here, right? Well, as it turns out, if you go off the glider facing sideways and then do Motion Glider in the direction of the track, you can redirect the extra sideways speed you normally get from it down the course, letting you go faster than normal. But while Jenzua was trying this, he accidentally went too far to the right and ended up going around the pillar, and that's when this happened. For some reason, hitting this ramp caused him to shoot off to the left incredibly quickly and trigger a Lakitu pickup. He was shocked. There was nothing in this game that could make you go this fast, but somehow it had just happened. He tried it again with the exact same result. But then he started to wonder, could this be used to save time in a run? So far, every time he had tried this, he got shot off so far to the left that Lakitu picked him up for going out of bounds. But if he could somehow make this happen without Lakitu getting involved, it could be a massive time save. Eventually, he discovered that by taking a more direct path to the ramp rather than looping around the pillar, you slow down just enough that you can avoid leaving the course. So how much time did doing this save? For some context, the original Motion Glider strategy allowed for a new world record with a time difference of only 6 milliseconds compared to the previous best time. And while this difference was increased with subsequent time trials, it shows that any amount of time saved with this new strat could be significant. On top of the time already saved by performing Motion Glider, the new technique saved 300 milliseconds per lap. But there was a problem. Once the speed wears off, you're stuck pretty far away from the track. You can glide back to it, but doing so loses all of the time you gain from performing the glitch in the first place. Luckily, the finish line is right here, so on the final lap this is a non-issue, but it rules out getting it on any of the others. And with that, Jenzua decided that it was finally time to publish his findings. And he immediately caught the attention of Army, one of the speedrunners who had been trying to lower the world record on the course since the discovery of the Motion Glider strat. He had set a few different records over the past couple days, but it was currently held by one of the best Mario Kart players ever, Alberto. Alberto had a really good run that improved the earlier time by a full 56 milliseconds, but Jenzua's new strat was so much faster that Army now had a chance at taking the record back. But there was an issue. You see, this glitch was the very last thing you would do in a speedrun and was therefore incredibly risky. Because if you went just a bit too far to the left, you would get picked up by Lakitu and completely kill the run, so any attempts that were on a decent pace either didn't go for the strat or did a much safer version of it that didn't save as much time. But even with the safer version, Army was able to complete the first world record time trial with Jenzua's new strategy, lowering the record significantly. And over the course of the next 2 days, Army lowered the record even further, all the way down to a 1:16.922. A day later, the player Pi posted a video on YouTube showcasing his run in which he calls the trick Jenzua Glider after its discoverer, and the name stuck. But Jenzua wasn't done. He knew that there had to be some way to get the trick on all 3 laps, but the problem was it just didn't seem like you could make it work. Staying in line with the track by doing regular Motion Glider allows you to get back to the ground almost immediately rather than having to glide back to the track, which was slower. But then, a few months later, he found something. If you used Motion Glider to tilt your kart sideways like normal, but then at the last second move the joystick to the right, the boost from the Jenzua Glider was cut almost in half, allowing you to stay in line with the track and get down to the ground almost immediately. Jenzua sent his findings to Alberto, who proceeded to set a new world record, 4 times in one day and then 2 more the next. And when Alberto had finished with his record-setting spree, he was left with a final time of 1:16.434, nearly half a second less than Army's record from April. And now that Thwomp Ruins had been revolutionized, everyone wanted to know what track would be next. But the problem with finding a new Jenzua location is that you need to find a place that allows you to recover from the sideways speed without losing any time. Thwomp Ruins works because the ramp you trick off of is far to one side of the course, and there aren't many walls in this area to restrict movement. But even this requires almost the entire inbounds area, and there are very few other courses that are this generous with space, and even less that have the ramp required to do the glitch in the first place. But there was one more possibility. If you could find a place after a glider panel that has a ramp and then a sharp turn to either direction, preferably with a finish line at the end, you could leverage the horizontal speed granted by the glitch to take the corner instead of having to glide back to the track, potentially making it even more efficient than the one on Thwomp Ruins. And lucky for them, that track existed. This area of Electrodrome is really open, and it seems like a really good spot to try, but it does have some issues. Even though it may not look like it when you're driving the course, this corner is a full 180-degree turnaround, which is really sharp considering you have to be in the air the entire time. And while it appears like you should be able to use this space off to the right of the finish to just barely complete the lap, there's an invisible wall here which stops you in midair. Even worse, when you fall down after bonking the wall, you're facing backwards, which makes it impossible to simply drive over the finish line, so seeing very little hope in this idea, Electrodrome was essentially abandoned. And then, a bit of good luck came their way. Wave 3 of the Booster Course Pass DLC was released, and along with it, Merry Mountain. Speedrunners immediately noticed this incredible Jenzua glider setup right at the end of the course and began testing it out. And only a couple hours later, on the 7th ever world record of the course, Alberto did this. It didn't save a whole ton of time, but it was enough to justify its placement in the run. Unlike on Thwomp Ruins, this one had absolutely zero chance of being done more than one time in a race because the glider panel needed doesn't even show up until the third lap. And that's how everything stayed, until May of 2023. Alberto is locked in a speedrunning battle with Panda, another top player on the course Singapore Speedway. He had held the record for about a month before Panda had reclaimed it and went on a record-setting streak, lowering the time by an impressive 150 milliseconds. Alberto needed an advantage to take the record lower, and that's when he realized something. This part of the star-shaped thing is trickable, and there's a glider right before it, so maybe you could get a Jenzua here. He tried it, and it worked perfectly. This new Jenzua glider was significantly easier than any of the previous ones, and while it only saved a few hundred milliseconds, it was enough to get Alberto the record. Until Panda found out about the trick a couple hours later and promptly took it back. But regardless, finding a new Jenzua glider strat made Alberto realize just how broken the trick could be, and he decided to revisit his idea for Electrodrome. He didn't really expect anything to come out of it, but he figured it was worth a shot anyway. He quickly figured out where he needed to hit the glider to give him the best chance of getting the glitch, and then started a run. But instead of being stopped by the wall, he was propelled backwards over the finish line, completing the lap almost 300 milliseconds ahead of the ghost he was racing. He immediately realized the massive potential of this glitch and started going for the world record with it. Like the initial method on Thwomp Ruins, it could only be done on the final lap, because you still landed facing into the wall. But regardless, after only a couple hours of research and time trialing, Alberto had set a new world record. And the amount of time saved by the glitch? An entire second. A completely unfathomable amount. Now, the run Alberto had done with the glitch wasn't perfect, and therefore wasn't able to take full advantage of the speed that it gives. But it was a good start, so we posted it, and chaos ensued. Nobody had ever seen something like this be used in a world record before. Sure, the other Jenzuas were cool, but this was on a completely different level. It set off a frenzy of runners trying to lower the time, with Alberto himself posting 8 records in under 72 hours. When the dust settled, Alberto was left with the world record of 1:22:067, a time save of over 1.5 seconds. But everything was far from over, because only a couple days after the initial discovery, player Mijon found something completely insane. By running into the wall at this very specific angle, he was able to just barely make it to the next glider panel, which immediately gave him all of the speed back and allowed him to continue along the track. Which meant that doing this on the first and second laps could be possible. But there was a problem. This was insanely hard and very inconsistent. It was only possible to get the glider panel properly about 1 in every 1,000 attempts, so nobody wanted to even try it due to how brutally difficult it would be to get it in an actual run. But a year later, someone finally decided to go for the Jenzua glider. And that someone was Jenzua himself. Due to how difficult the trick was, he realized that it was only feasible to do it on one of the 2 earlier laps, but the question is, which one should he do it on? He decided that doing it on lap 2 would be optimal, because while it would make each attempt take longer, he would be able to get 10 coins slightly faster than he could by doing it on lap 1, which saves time in the run itself. So he got to work, time trialing for weeks on end. There were some times that he got the Jenzua glider on the second lap, but then would mess up the last one, or would simply not drive the rest of the course well enough to beat Alberto's time. But 14 days later, this happened. Jenzua had done it. The 2 out of 3 was finally implemented in a world record, and the result was an impressive 300 millisecond time save. And just like after the one on Thwomp Ruins was perfected, everyone wanted to find the next Jenzua glider. But the thing is, they already did. Ever since the original version of Mario Kart 8 for the Wii U, speedrunners on DK Jungle have been dealing with an annoying glitch where their kart would randomly shoot off to the right when they hit this boost panel. For years, nobody had any idea why this happened, but now it was clear. This was a Jenzua glider. The problem with implementing this into a run is that you have a tiny amount of space to work with, and it didn't even seem like it would be possible to get it without being thrown completely off the track. But there's something about the DK Jungle 150cc run I haven't mentioned yet. DK Jungle is likely the last Mario Kart 8 Deluxe track that a minute barrier could be broken on, being only 300 milliseconds away from 2 minutes. Good driving alone likely wasn't enough to make up this time difference. If DK Jungle was going to be beaten in under 2 minutes, someone had to get the Jenzua glider, and Alberto was ready. To make a Jenzua work, he needed to hit the ramp as far to the left as he could and then get approximately this angle in order to just barely stay above the track and get to the next boost panel. He managed to get his kart turned just enough to the left that he could hit the panel at the correct angle, and while he did overshoot the edge of the track a bit, he was close enough that it was possible to glide the short distance back without losing too much time. So he began working on a world record. Even though he knew how to get the Jenzua, it was still incredibly inconsistent and precise, so getting it flawlessly on 2 laps, on top of maintaining a fast pace throughout the rest of the run, was really difficult. But only a few hours later, he got it on both laps and crossed the finish line 113 milliseconds ahead of the previous world record. This was still short of the 2-minute mark, but Alberto knew it could be improved. So he hopped back in, putting insane hours into this track over the next couple days, slowly lowering his time until he was less than 1/10 of a second away. And then, on August 21st, he got this run. A 159.979. The first time that DK Jungle had ever been beaten in under 2 minutes on 150cc, breaking the final minute barrier in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Following Alberto's record, there were attempts to get the Jenzua glider on 200cc, but the extra speed makes it completely impossible to make it back. So the trick stayed exclusive to 150. In fact, to this day, the DKJ Jenzua glider is one of only 3 courses that use the trick on 150cc. But for this, we have to return to Thwomp Ruins. There had always been attempts to get the Thwomp Ruins Jenzua on 150cc, but everyone who tried always faced the exact same issue. Looping around the pillar and hitting this ramp simply took way too long compared to just driving normally. But James, another Mario Kart speedrunner, had an idea. Instead of using the ramp off to the side, you could just go straight to the giant one in the middle, which should save some time. He posted it and then promptly forgot about it for a year. But in early 2024, he remembered about it and wanted to attempt it again, and after some encouraging words from Mirai, he got to work. He slowly but surely found small ways to cut down on the time, like a more aggressive approach angle, farther rotation for motion glider, better positioning before the glider, and more. These micro improvements began to add up, and before long, James's Jenzua glider was the faster method. But he wasn't done yet. He did some more testing and figured out that even though this Jenzua shot you completely off the track, on 150cc, gliding back down to the course doesn't actually lose that much time, meaning that this was viable on all laps. With this insane potential for time save, he went to Panda, one of the best 150cc Thwomp Ruins players, who almost immediately set a new world record. It was a bit rough around the edges, as he missed the Jenzua completely on lap 2, but this was remedied by another run posted a couple hours later, in which he successfully got all 3. He spent the next few days refining the run, perfecting the Jenzuas, and focusing on improving his driving on the rest of the track. And when all was said and done, Panda had cut almost a second off of the record, once again proving the power of the Jenzua glider. But there's one more track that we have yet to talk about, Ice Ice Outpost. The reason that nobody had tried Ice Ice for the longest time was because the game generally forces the glider to end around here, making it impossible to reach this ramp. But a few days before New Year's of 2025, James discovered that if you motion glide back and forth to build up enough speed, it was possible to go fast enough to stay in the air beyond this point and make it quite a bit further. He couldn't quite get to the ramp, but after improving the angle of attack and holding left to keep the glider around for as long as possible, he managed to barely get a launch off of the ramp. It was pretty terrible to say the least, but it did prove that a Jenzua had potential here. And after a bit more work, he was able to get a Jenzua that took him across the finish line. It was also discovered that if you do the Jenzua without performing a trick, it was significantly faster. This is because the trick boost causes you to regain traction upon landing, resulting in the player driving perpendicular to the course, which loses time. At this point, it was clear. This was a viable world record strat, albeit only on lap 3. This trick was insanely hard because of how difficult it was to keep the glider from disappearing. To do this, you need to hold left with the control stick, but if you rotate too much, you end up at a bad angle and crash into the wall before the finish line, which kills the run. But then, on January 6th, 2025, as I was interviewing Jenzua for this video, Alberto did this. Then, we get to today. Electrodrome is still only done on 2 out of 3 laps, and 6 Jenzua glider strats have been discovered in total. I should probably also note that there's a very small variation of the trick that happens on Sky High Sunday in the 150cc run. But considering how it's more of just a faster direction change than a boost, I didn't think it was important enough to include. There have been some attempts to get Jenzua gliders on other tracks, and James is doing whatever the heck this is, but it looks like for now at least, this is where everything's gonna stay. Finally, I'd like to thank Jenzua, Alberto, and James for all of their help with the information gathering and fact-checking that was required to make this video. And I haven't mentioned this before, but if you want to help support the channel, consider buying a membership or even just subscribing, because both of these help me out a ton. And thank you for watching.